Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of Series 1 of the science fiction comedy series from the UK, Red Dwarf. Now, this is a show that has gotten a pretty significant cult following. It has lasted multiple seasons over multiple decades. It's even gotten a made-for-television movie. And it's a show that I have never watched a single episode of until recently. I was definitely aware of its existence over the years, but I never really decided to sit down and watch it. And after seeing just 6 episodes in one series, I could definitely say that I enjoyed this enough that I will definitely check out more episodes of this show. And honestly, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to watching more of Red Dwarf because I I enjoyed it. I had fun with it. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on series one of Red Dwarf, I would like to give a special shout out to Otis Craig for requesting this review. And if there is another TV show, film, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. Link to both is in the video description down below, and I'll try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Red Dwarf is the brainchild of the writing duo of Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. They actually wrote the pilot for this show as far back as 1983. They turned it into their agent, who then turned it into BBC. But BBC was like, hey, we don't want this. But 3 years later, they tried again, and BBC actually was like, hey, this actually isn't that bad. And so they agreed to pick up the show. But it almost seemed like this show was never meant to be and never meant to get off the ground because as soon as it got picked up, a strike happened. So now they weren't able to actually start shooting and start filming the episodes. But eventually the strike ended. They were able to film the episodes. They aired 6 episodes in total for series one, and it became a surprise hit for BBC. And then the rest is history because it's gone on to have multiple more seasons and has been one of the more popular shows in terms of like the science fiction genre, or honestly one of the more popular sitcoms that the BBC has ever aired on their network. Now, the entire series mainly focuses on a series of characters. And Dave Lister, Holly, the computer, Arnold Rimmer, the hologram, and a humanoid named Cat. Now, in other later seasons, there are some other characters that are introduced, but those are the main characters for now. And they're all trapped, in essence, on this mining vessel, the Red Dwarf. And they're drifting through space and trying to head back to Earth. The cast for this show is a major part of its ultimate success. I genuinely feel if this show did not get the right cast, then this really would not have worked. It's something that is just very important when it comes to this show's overall uh, ability to not only connect itself with its audience, but also be something that actually is worth more than just one season. It's worth following these cast of characters throughout many adventures. So you have Chris Barrie, who plays Rimmer, who is this very uptight, anal officer who has this very inflated ego and view of himself that doesn't match his actual production and his actual stance in life. And his acting and his performance is great. There's even episodes where he has to play two different versions of himself at once, and just the way that he is able to just handle such a difficult character, who is a character that if you really break him down, this is a character the audience should hate. This is a character the audience should despise and want thrown off the ship. But because of the way that he plays his character, he's fun to watch. He's entertaining. He's the kind of character that you love to hate instead of the kind of character that you just hate outright and think he's total rubbish. You also have another really talented and genuinely funny performer in Craig Charles, who plays Lister, who in a lot of ways you could argue is the lead of the series, the main protagonist. He's this slobbish slacker who is very happy go lucky and doesn't really take things that seriously. In a lot of ways, he's kind of like a big kid, but he's got a good heart to him. And this is another character that, with the wrong approach, the wrong actor, could have come across as very obnoxious. But that's not the case here. He just comes across like a cool, fun guy that you'd want to be around and you'd want to share a beer with. And the dynamic between him and Chris Barrie is phenomenal. Like the two of them are a really great pair. They honestly are two that you would think on paper would be oil and water, but they're anything but. And their unique chemistry is a big part of why this show works. Now you also have Danny John-Jules who plays Cat, and he adds his own energy to the role and does a really great job, in my opinion, of embodying what a humanoid cat would be in terms of its attitude, the way that it behaves, and it leads us some genuinely funny moments throughout the show. You have Norman Lovett, who is the ship's computer. He's got a very dry sense of humor, but he's got a excellent deadpan, which really makes for some genuinely hilarious moments in the series. And you have some other actors and actresses who were also a part of the cast. Mac McDonald, who plays Captain Hollister, Robert Bathurst, who plays Toad Hunter, Claire Krogan, who plays Kochansky, um, Mark Williams as Peterson, as well as various other different performers. But the main cast is Chris Barrie, Craig Charles, Danny John-Jules, Norman Lovett, and all of them do some really great work in this series. Now, series one, it's a rather short first season. It's only 6 episodes, and each episode was around 30 minutes in length. It doesn't have a traditional pilot episode, even though it seems like one was written, which definitely affected the way that the writers were able to write the show. They've even talked about in interviews how they wish that they had a pilot episode, because if they had a pilot episode, then if the pilot did well and it got picked up, then they could spend the time in between waiting for the series to air to hone up their writing, to punch up some of the scripts, and just have more time in general to get the show up and running. But they didn't have that with Red Dwarf. So they just provided 6 episodes to the BBC. that they shot back to back. So the first episode is called The End. And this episode is directed by Ed By, who, by the way, directed every episode of Series 1. And did a really good job, too, especially when it comes to some of the episodes that are a little more ambitious, a little more risky when it comes to the comedy or when it comes to the stories. And the first episode is written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, as well as every other episode of Series 1. And the first episode, to me, it's a good starter. It's a good appetizer. It gives you a nice taste of what is to come, but it's not what I would consider to be one of the best episodes of this series. Because a lot of it is just establishing the characters and the setting. It initially takes place in the 23rd century. You have this slobbish technician named Dave Lister, who's a crew member of the Red Dwarf. And he has another coworker of his who's always writing him and always trying to write him up for things that he's doing that are considered to be insubordinate in Rimmer. And the two are really not a good, not doesn't really seem like they're a good pair, a good fit for one another, because they don't get a lot done when they're working together because they're constantly bickering at one another. And from the very first exchange between these two characters, you know that you're in for a fun time, because Rimmer is just being over the top when it comes to his anal retentiveness, and he can't stand the fact that Lister is humming while he's doing his job. So he's given Lister all of his crap for humming and is telling him to stop humming and stop doing that. And so Lister's like, fine, I'll just make different mouth noises. So he just starts making different kinds of mouth noises instead of humming. And it annoys Rimmer to the point where he just snaps and he tells Lister to not make any noise with his mouth whatsoever. And of course, when Rimmer needs to talk to Lister and to get information from him or to get him to answer a question, Lister just messes with him even more and doesn't even say a word and just mimes it without saying anything. And that cracked me up. I was like, okay, that's really funny. This is gonna be fun. And that's the moment where I was like, okay, I can already say that I'm enjoying this. There weren't as many funny moments throughout this episode. After that, there were some. Don't get me wrong. There were some great bits of deadpan, dark humor from the computer Hawley when he's mentioning that everybody is dead on the ship. And there's some other moments, but it was still funny enough. And I just like the absurd premise of this series. The premise of this show is just funny to me. The overall origin of these characters. So Lister, he has this cat named Frankenstein that's pregnant, and he smuggled it on board the Red Dwarf. And his superior finds out about it, tells him, "Hey, you got to give me that cat, or you're going to go into suspended animation. You're going to go into stasis for 18 months." And Lister's like, "No, I'm not giving you my cat. Because the cat is part of my plan to go to Fiji and start a farm and start a new life on Earth, and I'm not giving you my cat." So Lister winds up getting put into stasis for 18 months. So you think. But in reality, when he wakes up and he's released from his stasis pod, it's now 3 million years later. And he's the only survivor of the Red Dwarf. Everyone else has died and has been turned into powder. He finds out what happened when the computer Hawley tells him that there was some atomic or nuclear explosion that occurred on the ship after Rimmer tried to fix something that was wrong with it and failed. And so at first, Lister's thinking, okay, this sucks. I'm stuck on this ship, but I have the ship to myself. I can use this ship to go back to Earth. Maybe it's not all bad. Maybe I can have one big giant party on here. And then he finds out that there is technically another person on board the ship other than the computer, but that person happens to be Rimmer, who has now been resurrected as a hologram. So just the worst possible person to be a companion, and they're there with you. You're stuck with this guy. And that in itself is really funny. And then it just gets funnier because then you find out that there's another humanoid that's on board, but it's a descendant of the baby cat that was born from Frankenstein 3 million years ago. Because 3 million years have passed, you now have had 3 million years of evolution. So now the cats have evolved into humanoid people. And so now you have like this humanoid cat who's now on board the ship. You have Lister, who is having to now basically coexist with this annoying, anal retentive, uh, up his own ass coworker that he constantly despised and didn't like being around. And now he has to be around this guy for God knows how long. And you got the snarky computer who's also along for the ride. So it's a good start to things, and it's a good way to establish the dynamics between the different crew members and the overall setting. And the whole stasis thing and him waking up three million years later in the future, that sounds familiar because that's exactly the plot of Futurama. When Philip J. Fry accidentally winds up getting put into cryogenics stasis, he gets put into stasis himself, and then is woken up all these many years in the future. And I'm like, did the creators of that show, did Matt Groening and everybody else, did they watch Red Dwarf? Because it definitely seems like they did. Because the parallels are pretty uncanny, if you ask me. Even Lister himself, in a lot of ways, is somebody who you could honestly see as a template for Fry. The slacker, kind of a slob, kind of a dunce at points, but has a heart of gold. Definitely, it's somebody that has a lot of Fry traits, but he existed before Philip J. Fry did. I still really like Futurama, but that is interesting to me because it seems like it's a little too similar to just be a coincidence. Now, episode 2, though, Future Echoes, is really when this show, in my opinion, goes from okay to fantastic. Because this episode is great. I love this episode. After your crew is now established in terms of Lister, Rimmer, and the cat, and Hawley, Lister decides to enact the plan that he's always had, which is to go to Fiji and to go back to Earth. So he has the computer set a course for Earth, and so in order to get to Earth, they have to go into light speed. So once they go into light speed, though, they start encountering future echoes of the future that are appearing throughout the ship. And the way that that is handled with this script is really smart. It's really clever. And it's genuinely hilarious at points because it's just something that's just so weird and strange and almost unpredictable at points. There's a really good amount of suspense and tension throughout this episode because Rimmer, apparently, according to him, saw Lister die. So he saw a future echo of Lister dying trying to fix something on the ship. So now you have this extra suspense in terms of, okay, when is that going to happen? Is Lister going to be able to find a way to stop that from happening, and how? And that is something that is very well handled throughout this screenplay and throughout the entire episode. And it leads to some really great acting by Chris Barrie, because there's a scene where he has to say the same lines with the same ferocity and with the same uh, approach back to back and make it seamless, so it can really create the effect that there's this deja vu thing going on. And he does it and did it brilliantly. And there's just a lot of stuff about this episode I really like and I really loved. The bit where Lister winds up communicating with his future self, which is like 100+ years old and has a robot hand, and just a lot of the surprises and different twists throughout the episode. Just a really clever, really witty, really fun episode. And that, in my opinion, I would probably say is my favorite episode of Series 1. Now, episode 3 is still not too bad, still entertaining, still enjoyable enough, and balance of power. But most of this episode is a flashback. It's a bunch of flashback footage of when the crew was still alive, and Lister was hanging out with different crew members and going drinking, and he's feeling upset and down on himself because he never got the opportunity to ask this woman named Kochansky out on a date before she died. So he's trying to get Rimmer to bring her back and in the form of a hologram. But in order to do that, Rimmer has to be replaced by the hologram of Kochansky. And Rimmer doesn't trust Lister when it comes to Lister turning Rimmer back on, if he does decide to do this. And he just doesn't really see Lister as necessarily a friend at this point, just somebody that he's just stuck with on the Red Dwarf. So he refuses. He refuses to allow Lister to communicate and to spend time with the hologram of Kochansky. So Lister decides to get back at Rimmer in a genuinely clever way. He decides to get back at him by taking this cooking exam so that he can become a chef. So that will allow him to outrank Rimmer. And of course, Rimmer doesn't want that to happen because he's on a power trip and he is an egocentric uh, uh, type of individual. So he tries to do all these different things to try to stop Rimmer from passing this exam. He even goes as far as impersonating Kochansky. And honestly, a pretty funny scene. And even the scene after that is really funny to me. It's just the image and just the just the absurdity of Rimmer having like one boob and then like walking around as if he has Kachansky's hips, but he doesn't. But he doesn't really register to him. Like he's questioning it. And he's like sashaying around. He's like, I swear I have Kachansky's hips, but like Lister isn't saying anything. He's just letting it play out. There's a lot of stuff with the hologram and different bits and different parts being attached to Rimmer throughout this episode. That's really fun. There was this other guy, this other crew member who doesn't like Rimmer, who now his arm is on Rimmer's body, and it's like attacking him and like trying to poke him in the eye. And there's just a lot of clever stuff with that. There's a lot of clever stuff in general with the hologram. Like in one episode, Rimmer is asking for a haircut, and he's a dick to the computer, so it gives him like a bouffant lady's hairdo. And there's just some really, fun stuff that is being implemented throughout this particular series when it comes to the different sort of creative and innovative things that are done with the different technology, whether it's a hologram or the computer or a toaster that has an AI in it that's also snarky and making commentary on things. But this isn't really one of the strongest episodes of the series. It's still enjoyable enough to watch because of the whole way that uh Lister is trying to take this chef exam so we can outrank Rimmer, and it's got a fun ending to it, but too much of it is flashback stuff, so I'm not really big on that. So it just winds up being an episode that I thought was okay. Episode 4, on the other hand, I would probably say is the weakest and arguably the worst episode of series 1. This one is called Waiting for God. And this is an episode that apparently even the writers and other people involved with this show didn't care for. And I can definitely see why. This is one where they had an idea and a concept, but that's really all that they had for this. And by itself, it wasn't funny enough. So there really wasn't a whole lot that they could do with this episode. So it led to the funnier moments being stuff that was just like improvised, like the bit with Lister when he's in the room with the pod and he's like messing around on the glass, and that's the kind of stuff that is more memorable and gets laughs versus a lot of the other stuff in this. But I do appreciate the ambition of this episode. I don't think it's really that good of an episode, but I do appreciate that it was trying to go into a different direction. It was trying to have some deeper social commentary about religion, because a lot of it is about the cat religion. It's about the cat's species, Felis sapiens, and how the events unfolded that led to the creation of cat kind, and uh, Lister being this cat god, and him grappling with the idea of him being a god, and him feeling bad about the various different things that the cat people did to one another in the name of him. And there is some funny bits of satire about religion in terms of how ridiculous and crazy it might seem. It, and in a lot of ways, if you look at different religious texts in a certain context, they are honestly pretty absurd. Not any more absurd than the cat religion, if you ask me. They're equally absurd, and I do appreciate the balls that this episode has to actively point that out. But the whole cat religion thing is just not anywhere near as funny as a lot of the other plots and a lot of the other episodes or moments in this particular series. And the best part of this episode is the subplot with Rimmer finding what he thinks is an alien pod. And he's dead set and really deluded himself to believing that it's a pod that has a beautiful alien woman in it that has 6 breasts that he can make love to later, and it can give him a human body again. And Lister finds out pretty quickly that it's just a garbage pod from the Red Dwarf that they just recaptured and brought back on board the ship. And because, he's just messing with Rimmer, he doesn't tell him the truth until later. And when Rimmer eventually realizes that it's a garbage pod, after he's tried so hard to delude himself into thinking that a piece of rotting chicken is an alien life form, he has a reaction that is honestly quite funny. So this isn't, in my opinion, like a really strong episode, but it has some strong moments in it. Episode 5 is called Confidence and Paranoia. And this is another really creative and fun episode. Not what I would consider to be my favorite of this series. There's honestly one other episode that I like a little bit more than this one, but I still enjoyed it. And this one, it mostly deals with Lister and his delusions, his hallucinations, his sick fever dreams that have materialized in solid form. Because what has happened is Lister goes into a different part of the ship that was quarantined, but it hasn't been cleared as safe yet. So he winds up getting a mutant case of pneumonia. And this mutant case of pneumonia causes whatever he dreams about to become a reality. So if he dreams about fish falling from the sky, fish fall from the sky. If he dreams about some 12th century guy exploding into a ball of fire, he dreams about that and then it actually happens. So the fish fall from the sky, this 12th century guy explodes in front of Rimmer, and his confidence and his paranoia also take solid form. And because they are, in essence, germs or viruses, they are extensions of his sickness. They're doing all these different things in order to live, because they don't want to die. So they're trying to prevent Lister from getting healthy. And Rimmer's trying to communicate this to Lister, but Lister's not having any of it because he's getting manipulated by his confidence, which is actually played by Craig Ferguson, who would go on to do a really great job with this late night talk show. That was honestly one of the last late night talk shows, other than the Conan show, that I thought was any good. And he plays his confidence, and he does a great job. And there's this other guy who's very wiry and just creepy looking, and he does a good job as well playing his paranoia. And at first, it seems like Rimmer and the paranoia get along because their personalities are similar, but eventually, even Rimmer is getting tired of the paranoia. And what happens is Confidence actually takes out paranoia, and he's trying to trick Lister into actually killing himself, so then the Confidence can survive and live on without Lister, because he tricks Lister into going outside of the spaceship, try to find this it's almost a package, it's a container that features all the different holograms of different people on the Red Dwarf that Rimmer has put and hid from Lister. And Lister's confidence allows Lister to get the confidence to go out there and try to get the holograms. And he finds them, but then confidence reveals that he killed his paranoia, and that he's trying to get Lister to take his helmet off and saying, "Hey, you can breathe out here. I don't believe what everybody's saying. Like that's nothing. Trust me. You got this. You can breathe uh just fine." Uh but confidence is so dumb that he winds up killing himself because he takes his helmet off and explodes. In a pretty cool looking effect, by the way. And Lister then returns to the Red Dwarf and he tries to play back the hologram of Kachansky, but it actually is another version of Rimmer. And Rimmer just pulls he does a little bit of one upping at Lister's expense, which was a nice change of pace. But now you've got the problem of having not one but two Rimmers. And that's what leads to the sixth episode, which is the second favorite episode of series one for me, Me Squared. And this one is where Rimmer decides to move in with his double, his duplicate. So he moves out of the quarters that he was sharing with Lister, and Lister is initially very happy about this because, oh man, I get this stick in the mud, this total square, this total loser out of my quarters. I can do whatever I want. I can drink my beer. I can throw my dirty socks on the floor. Ooh, wait, those are pretty rank. Put them back in the basket. Yeah, at first it's awesome. It's fun. But then he gets really annoyed with the two listers because they can't coexist with one another. They're getting on each other's nerves. They are yelling at each other. They're making it so Lister can't sleep. Lister can't enjoy his movies. Lister can't relax. He can't have fun because the two Rimmers are too busy yelling at each other and being incredibly annoying. So he decides to make the choice to delete one of them. And throughout this episode, Lister is also learning more about Rimmer. He watches his death video. He sees that Rimmer said a gazpacho soup before he died, which is definitely trying to be like a Citizen Kane kind of thing for sure. Instead of Rosebud, it's gazpacho soup. But there's actually is a connection uh, that makes sense and is honestly interesting when it comes to the gazpacho soup and Rimmer. You find out later that the last time that Rimmer was actually maybe considered to be a serious candidate for a promotion is when he was invited to the captain's quarters to have dinner with them, and he was given gazpacho soup, and he was such a moron. He thought that it had to be hot, even though it's supposed to be cold, and he ordered it to be microwaved or served to him hot, and he gets it heated up. They give it to him, and everybody around the table is just cracking up and laughing at him. And then he never had another opportunity again to go to the captain's quarters, let alone be considered for a promotion. So that's why gazpacho soup is very prominent on his mind. And he says all of this to Lister when he thinks that this is going to be his last moments, because he thinks that Lister picked him to turn off, but Lister already turned off the double because he just wanted to get Lister to open up. He wanted Rimmer to open up to him, Lister. Sorry, I got the two mixed up. I mean, they they sound very similar. Rimmer, Lister, and they both end in But Rimmer was never going to do that on his own because he, at this point, still doesn't really respect or appreciate Lister enough. But this is really a moment where you start to see, okay, I think they're starting to kind of have a bit of a mutual respect for one another. So you think. because Rimmer does this whole thing where it's like, okay, I told you this, but just don't mention it again. And Lister's like, I won't, trust me. But then he makes a soup joke near the end of the episode. So it's like he still hasn't decided to drop it yet. But he didn't say gazpacho soup, so he didn't mention that. He just said it's super, you know. So I like that. It was a moment that humanized these characters further, and it was still funny. Still had some clever ways to utilize the absurdity of the situation, and just the whole idea, the whole way that they handled the two Rimmers interacting with one another and getting pissed at each other was genuinely hilarious to me. And Chris Barrie was definitely the MVP of this episode, especially when it comes to him having to play two different versions of himself. And he did a incredible job playing a dual role in this episode. So this season, in my opinion, it ends on a relative high note. This is a show that's really starting to pick up some steam. The writers are definitely starting to find their stride here. Uh, they had a little more time to work on Me Squared, and this is after they had already shot and written and produced a handful of other episodes. So they knew what worked and what didn't, and more of what they wanted to continue to do. And that definitely led to one of the stronger episodes. And there are other aspects of the show and of the series that I want to mention real quick. For instance, I really like the model work. The model design of the Red Dwarf itself is really unique and cool looking, and it's a relatively well designed and well put together model. The other different practical effects throughout the show for a low budget show are actually quite good. The scutters were actually made out of real parts and could actually move around via remote control. They weren't very reliable, and they were a pain in the ass apparently for people to work with, but they were something that was actually technically a real invention that could actually somewhat function like a machine or a robot would. So that's definitely pretty cool. And the production design and the art direction, costuming, thought they did a pretty good job with that as well. The music, not what I would consider to be like the most dynamic or amazing score, but it definitely fit the series well, especially the opening theme. So it's a series that is definitely aged a little, at least this first season, because you definitely see more of the cheaper sets and some of the effects that are a bit chintzy looking and cheap, but there's still a certain charm to it all, and it isn't to the point where it's like so distracting and so bad that it takes you out of the show. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid first season for the show. It definitely helps that it's only 6 episodes, so there's not really honestly that many filler episodes, which is something you see way too much of in other series and other shows in general. And 30-minute runtime for each episode makes it so they don't really wind up having too many pacing problems. They don't wind up becoming too dull, too boring most of the time. Even when it comes to some of the weaker episodes, they're still tolerable and watchable enough for what they are. So yeah, I would say if you like science fiction comedy shows, sci-fi parody stuff, I would recommend checking this show out. I do feel it is absolutely an acquired taste, as is a lot of British comedy, a lot of British television shows. But I think this is a show that I think has more easily accessible writing and characters and a plot in comparison to some of the other stuff that the BBC has done that's similar to Red Dwarf. Um, the humor is dry at points, but it's not anywhere near as dry as some of the other British comedies. The satire, I think, is something a lot of sci-fi fans can actually get most of the time. The comedy at points could be kind of slapsticky and zany, but it's not total cartoon nonsense. And it's also not just broad humor or potty humor either. There's not a lot of puerile stuff. There's like a few smelly socks or a few things here and there, but it's not something that is relying upon fart jokes and gross out gags. So that's something that I really, really appreciated because I prefer my comedy to not go in that direction uh, most of the time. So I actually thought it was genuinely smart. And especially the Future Echoes episode. I mean, that's a really well written episode when it comes to dealing with time and uh that whole aspect of different timelines and everything coinciding and connecting with one another. So yeah, I would say this is a pretty interesting, pretty enjoyable, pretty engaging uh show so far. So I would gladly review more seasons of this show or more series of this show if somebody asks in the future. Otherwise, I'll just watch more on my free time because I enjoyed series one enough that I I'm definitely gonna watch more of this. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Red Dwarf Series 1. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.